Picture this. I'm standing in my backyard at dawn, watching 12 hives that took me 3 years to build get destroyed by exterminators in hazmat suits. The chemical smell burned my nose as thousands of bees that had become my therapy, my daughter's college fund, and my late wife's living memorial dropped dead around my feet. My 16-year-old Sophia was crying on the porch, clutching her mom's old research notebook about pollinator behavior. $3,000 worth of equipment getting hosed down with poison. $8,000 a year in honey sales for her college fund, gone. But here's what Meredith Hamilton White, our HOA president, didn't know when she orchestrated this whole thing. She just messed with the wrong veteran, and I had something she never saw coming. Before we get into how I destroyed her entire world, drop your state in the comments. I want to know if HOAs are this psychotic everywhere, or if Tennessee just breeds a special kind of crazy, because what happened next is going to make you question every power-hungry neighbor you've ever met. Let me back up and tell you who I am. Antonio Vasquez, everyone calls me Tony, 47 years old, been a veterinarian here in Nashville for 8 years now. Before that, I was a combat medic in Afghanistan for 2 tours. The transition back wasn't easy. You know those stories about veterans struggling with PTSD? Yeah, that was me. Nightmares, flashbacks, the whole mess. The VA tried pills, therapy, support groups. Nothing really stuck until my wife Elena, God rest her soul, suggested something completely different. Elena was a high school biology teacher, brilliant woman who understood ecosystems better than most college professors. She'd always wanted to try beekeeping as an educational project. Honey, she said, and yes, she knew exactly what she was doing with that word choice. Maybe taking care of something that needs you might help you take care of yourself. So we started with 2 hives in our backyard here in Willow Glen residence. Just me, Elena, and little Sophia, learning about bee behavior, honey production, the whole fascinating world of pollinators. Turns out there's something incredibly calming about working with bees. They're predictable in a way that combat never was. Focused. Purposeful. When Elena got diagnosed with cancer 4 years ago, those bees became our family therapy. Sophia would sit with her mom in the garden, taking notes about which flowers the bees preferred, how weather affected their behavior, what made a healthy hive thrive. Elena kept detailed records right up until the end, turning our backyard into a real research station. After we lost her, Sophia and I expanded the operation. 12 hives now, all registered properly with the state agriculture department. I sell honey to 4 local restaurants, bring in about $8,000 a year. Not life-changing money, but enough to start a college fund for Sophia, who wants to study entomology at Vanderbilt thanks to her mom's influence. The bees had become my meditation. Every morning before work, I'd check the hives, listen to their humming, watch them work. It kept the nightmares at bay better than any medication ever had. We weren't bothering anybody. Our corner lot backs up to a wooded area, the hives are positioned away from neighbors' properties, and in 3 years, we'd never had a single incident. Not one sting, not one complaint. Until Meredith showed up to our neighborhood. Meredith Hamilton White moved in 6 months ago, right after her messy departure from Hamilton Pharmaceuticals, her family's company. Word around the neighborhood was that her younger cousins had pushed her out of the executive suite, so she'd bought the biggest house in our HOA to prove she was still relevant. This woman was something else. 55 years old, always dressed like she was heading to a country club board meeting, even when she was just checking her mailbox. She drove a white BMW that she parked at angles that somehow took up 2 spaces. And she had this way of talking to people like they were hired help, even when she was asking for favors. Her first week in the neighborhood, she got herself elected HOA president. Apparently, she'd bought coffee and pastries for the voting meeting and gave this whole speech about elevating our community standards and protecting property values. Most folks just wanted someone else to handle the boring stuff like pool maintenance and lawn care disputes. I should have paid more attention. The first time Meredith saw my hives, I was out doing a routine inspection on a Saturday morning. I heard this blood-curdling scream from the direction of her house. I'm thinking heart attack, break-in, something serious. I ran over to find her standing in her driveway, pointing at my backyard like she'd spotted a terrorist. "Are those beehives?" she shrieked, clutching what looked like an EpiPen in her perfectly manicured hand. "Yes, ma'am," I said, trying to keep it friendly. "I'm a licensed beekeeper. They're registered with the state and everything." Her whole face went white. "I have severe allergies, anaphylactic shock. Those things could kill me." Now, I've seen real allergic reactions. I've treated anaphylaxis in the field and in my vet practice. This woman was breathing fine, no swelling, no hives on her skin, normal voice. But she was waving that EpiPen around like a magic wand. "Ma'am, the hives are over 100 feet from your property line, and bees generally don't travel that direction anyway because of the wind patterns and—" "I don't care about your bee science," she snapped. "This is a residential neighborhood, not a farm. Those insects are a menace to public safety." That should have been my first clue. Anyone with a real bee allergy would know basic facts about bee behavior, flight patterns when they're most active. This woman was scared of the idea of bees, not actually allergic to them. But I tried to be reasonable. If you'd like, I can show you the safety measures I've taken, explain how. You'll be hearing from the HOA, she said, storming back into her house with that EpiPen still clutched dramatically to her chest. 2 days later, I got a certified letter. Emergency HOA meeting, my bee situation, was the only agenda item. That meeting was a setup from the start. Meredith had done her homework. She'd printed out cherry-picked articles about bee attack incidents, blown up photos of people with severe allergic reactions, and even brought a fake medical report claiming that 15% of residents had potentially life-threatening bee allergies. When I say fake, I mean fake. I caught at least 3 medical terms used incorrectly, and the statistics didn't match anything from actual allergist associations, but she presented it like she was some kind of medical expert, throwing around pharmaceutical terminology and talking about liability exposure. Most of our neighbors hadn't even realized I was keeping bees. The hives aren't visible from the street, and I deliberately positioned them to minimize any interaction with foot traffic. A few people asked reasonable questions. Was I licensed? How many stings had there been? What safety precautions was I taking? But Meredith steamrolled right over any actual discussion. She'd already drafted an emergency ordinance declaring any aggressive insect colonies a public health hazard, with immediate removal required within 48 hours. This isn't about Mr. Vasquez personally, she said with fake sympathy. I'm sure he's a lovely man, but as HOA president, I have a legal obligation to protect all residents from foreseeable harm. Here's something most people don't know about HOA emergency powers. They're designed for actual emergencies, like if a tree falls across the main road, or there's a gas leak, or someone's septic system fails. They're not meant to be used because one person moves into a neighborhood and decides they don't like something that's been there for years. But nobody at that meeting knew that. They just heard medical emergency and legal liability and voted to approve her ordinance. Unanimous except for me and 2 neighbors who abstained. 48 hours to remove 12 hives and 3 years of work, or face daily fines starting at $500. I tried talking to her after the meeting. Mrs. Hamilton White, surely we can work something out. Maybe I could relocate a few hives, or we could install additional screening. The decision is final, she said, not even looking at me while she packed up her folders. This isn't personal, Mr. Vasquez. It's simply business. That's when I knew this was never about bee allergies or public safety. This was about control, about showing the neighborhood who was boss. I just happened to be convenient target practice. The fines started immediately. $500 a day, every single day, I didn't remove the hives. Do the math on that. By the end of the first week, I was looking at $3,500 in penalties. By the end of the month, $15,000. But that was just the beginning of Meredith's campaign. First, she started calling the health department with anonymous complaints about unsanitary conditions at my property. The inspector who came out was actually apologetic. He could see the hives were maintained properly, no standing water, no signs of disease or pest problems, but he had to file a report every time someone called. "Look, Dr. Vasquez," he said. "Yeah, people in agriculture still call veterinarians doctor. Your setup is cleaner than most commercial apiaries I inspect, but my hands are tied. Every complaint generates paperwork." She called 5 times that first week. Then she went after my business. I had contracts with 4 local restaurants to supply honey, nothing huge, but steady income that helped with Sophia's expenses. Somehow, these restaurants started getting anonymous tips about contamination concerns with my honey. Fake social media posts claiming people had gotten sick. Complete lies, but enough to make restaurant managers nervous. 2 of them canceled their contracts temporarily until this gets sorted out. That's $3,000 in lost annual income, gone overnight. But the thing that really got to me was watching what it did to Sophia. Kids at school started talking. Their parents had heard about the bee controversy, and suddenly Sophia was the girl with the dangerous dad. She came home one day with tears in her eyes because some classmate had said I was going to get someone killed with my bug obsession. That night, I found her in her room, reading through her mom's old research notes about bee behavior and pollinator conservation. She looked up at me with Elena's eyes and asked, "Daddy, are we really doing something wrong?" That's when the anger turned cold. Strategic. Because Meredith had made one critical mistake. She'd hurt my daughter, and I'd started to notice things about her severe allergy that didn't add up. Here's the thing about medical fraud. When you've got actual medical training, the fakes start standing out. And I'd been watching Meredith's little performances for weeks now. Every time she saw me in the yard, she'd clutch that EpiPen and start breathing heavy like she was having some kind of allergic reaction just from being in the same zip code as my bees. But her symptoms were all wrong. Real anaphylaxis doesn't work that way. You don't get gradual symptoms from being near an allergen that's 100 yards away. You don't clutch your throat dramatically while speaking in full sentences. And you definitely don't recover instantly the moment the allergen is out of sight. Plus, that EpiPen she carried everywhere. I'd gotten close enough to see it a few times. The label was faded in a way that suggested it was old, like expired old. Most people with severe allergies are obsessive about checking expiration dates and carrying backup injectors. Meredith had one ancient pen that she waved around like a prop, but I needed more than suspicions. I needed evidence, and I needed to figure out how to fight back, legally. That's when I remembered something Elena used to say about her biology classes. When someone tries to use fake science to win an argument, you don't fight them with emotion. You fight them with better science. Time to do some research. Now here's where my professional background started paying off. As a licensed veterinarian, I have access to agricultural databases and regulatory information that most people never see, and what I found changed everything. First discovery, my hives weren't just random bee colonies. They were registered with the Tennessee Department of Agriculture as part of the state's pollinator conservation program. Elena had signed us up 3 years ago when she was doing her educational project. I'd renewed the registration every year out of habit, never realizing what legal protections it provided. Turns out, Tennessee considers registered pollinators to be agricultural animals under state law, with the same protections as livestock. Even in residential areas, if you're properly licensed and following safety protocols, agricultural rights supersede most HOA restrictions. Second discovery, federal protection. The USDA has been pushing hard on pollinator conservation since the bee population crashes started making national news. My educational registration qualified for federal agricultural exemptions under the Interstate Commerce Act. You know what that means? It means HOAs can't ban agricultural activities that are federally protected, even if those activities happen in residential neighborhoods. It's like trying to ban someone from having a vegetable garden. Federal agricultural policy trumps local housing covenants. But the biggest discovery came when I started digging into Meredith's background at Hamilton Pharmaceuticals. This woman had been claiming medical expertise to justify her bee ban, throwing around pharmaceutical terminology and presenting herself as some kind of allergy specialist. I found archived press releases from Hamilton Pharmaceuticals' website. Meredith Hamilton White had worked in marketing and business development. Never held a medical degree, never worked in clinical settings, never published any research on allergies or anaphylaxis. But here's the kicker. I found old photos from company events where she was photographed at outdoor venues, including one charity golf tournament where she was literally standing next to a flower garden with bees visible in the background. Smiling, relaxed, no EpiPen in sight. This woman wasn't allergic to bees. She was scared of them. And she'd been using fake medical claims to manipulate HOA policy. While I was building my case, Meredith was escalating hers. The anonymous complaints to the health department weren't working, so she tried a new angle, professional sabotage. I started getting calls from the Tennessee State Board of Veterinary Medical Examiners. Anonymous complaints about my professional conduct. Claims that I was operating an unlicensed agricultural facility. Reports that I was treating wild animals without proper permits. Anyone who knows veterinary regulations knows how ridiculous these complaints were. But each one required paperwork, responses, sometimes site inspections. It's the kind of bureaucratic harassment designed to exhaust your time and resources even when you're completely in the right. Then came the big gun. She tried to get me involuntarily committed for psychiatric evaluation. I'm not kidding. She filed a petition claiming I was a danger to community safety due to unstable behavior related to military service trauma. She'd apparently been documenting every time I was out working with the hives, spinning it as evidence of obsessive-compulsive behavior and inability to respond to reasonable safety concerns. The petition included statements from concerned neighbors. Though nobody would tell me who these neighbors were, it painted me as an unstable veteran who was using dangerous animals to act out some kind of military fantasy. Here's what really burned me up. She was using my PTSD, my military service, as a weapon against me. Taking the therapy that had saved my sanity and turning it into evidence that I was crazy. The court date for the psychiatric evaluation was set for the same week as Sophia's college application deadlines. My daughter was having to explain to admissions counselors why her dad was being investigated by multiple state agencies and facing involuntary commitment. That's when I realized Meredith wasn't just trying to win, she was trying to destroy my entire life, my profession, my mental health, my relationship with my daughter, everything. Time to show her what happens when you come after a veteran's family. But first, I had to survive the psychiatric evaluation hearing. This was Meredith's masterstroke. If she could get a court to declare me mentally unstable, it would justify everything she'd done and make my professional licenses vulnerable. She'd hired a lawyer, a real one, not just some HOA attorney. This guy specialized in civil commitment cases and had brought a thick folder of documentation about my dangerous obsessions and failure to respond to community safety concerns. I represented myself. Couldn't afford a lawyer after months of fines and lost business income. Just me, my veterinary credentials, and a folder full of research I'd been compiling for weeks. The hearing was in a small courtroom downtown. Meredith sat in the front row, still clutching that prop EpiPen, occasionally fanning herself like the stress was triggering her allergies. Her lawyer presented their case first, made me sound like a dangerous lunatic who'd been terrorizing the neighborhood with weaponized insects. They had photos of my hives, documentation of my refusal to comply with safety regulations, and testimonials from neighbors about feeling threatened by my aggressive behavior. When it was my turn, I started with basics. Your Honor, my name is Dr. Antonio Vasquez. I'm a licensed veterinarian, military veteran, and registered beekeeper with the Tennessee Department of Agriculture. Then I pulled out my evidence. First, I explained the legal status of my hives, properly registered, federally protected, operating under valid agricultural exemptions. I had copies of all permits, licenses, and safety inspections from the past 3 years. Next, I addressed the mental health claims. Your Honor, Mrs. Hamilton White has characterized my beekeeping as evidence of psychological instability. I'd like to present testimony from Dr. Jennifer Martinez at the Nashville VA, who has been treating my PTSD for 4 years, and specifically recommended apiary therapy as part of my treatment plan. Dr. Martinez had written a detailed letter explaining how beekeeping had helped stabilize my mental health, reduce my dependency on medications, and provided healthy coping mechanisms for military trauma. She was prepared to testify that removing my hives would likely trigger a setback in my recovery. But the real bombshell came when I started talking about the complainant's credibility. Your Honor, Mrs. Hamilton White has based her entire case on claims of severe bee allergies and medical expertise regarding anaphylaxis. I'd like to present evidence that these claims are fraudulent. I pulled out those old photos from Hamilton Pharmaceutical's website. This is the petitioner at a 2019 charity event, standing in a garden with active bee colonies visible in the background. No medical equipment, no signs of distress. Then I held up a magnified photo of her EpiPen. This is the expired medical device Mrs. Hamilton White has been carrying as evidence of her allergy. The expiration date is clearly visible as March 2021. This device has been inactive for over 4 years. The judge leaned forward. Are you saying the petitioner has been presenting false medical evidence? I'm saying that someone with genuine anaphylactic bee allergies would never carry an expired EpiPen, would never voluntarily attend outdoor events near active hives, and would exhibit actual symptoms rather than theatrical performances. Meredith's lawyer was scrambling, objecting that I wasn't qualified to diagnose medical conditions. But I wasn't diagnosing anything. I was pointing out inconsistencies in her story using basic medical knowledge. The judge dismissed the petition. Not only that, but he ordered an investigation into whether false medical claims had been used to harass a veteran receiving disability treatment. That's when everything started unraveling for Meredith. Word spread fast about what had happened in court. Our neighborhood HOA suddenly had questions about why their president had been using fake medical emergencies to harass a veteran. People started asking to see the medical evidence Meredith had used to justify her emergency ordinance. I called an emergency meeting of my own. Time to present some real facts. This time, I came prepared. I brought Dr. Sarah Chen, an entomologist from Vanderbilt who'd been following Sophia's pollinator research. I brought documentation of my agricultural licenses and federal protections. And I brought a timeline of Meredith's escalating harassment campaign. But most importantly, I brought the smoking gun I'd been holding back. Folks, Mrs. Hamilton White has been claiming medical expertise to justify her actions against my family. I think you should know what kind of medical expert she actually is. I pulled out printed pages from the Tennessee Board of Health's fraud investigation database. Meredith Hamilton White has been under investigation for medical insurance fraud since 2018. She's been filing claims for allergy treatments and emergency medical equipment using fabricated symptoms and falsified doctor's notes. The room got very quiet. The expired EpiPen she's been carrying, it was prescribed to her aunt, who actually did have bee allergies. Her aunt died in 2021, and Meredith kept the medical device to support her insurance fraud scheme. I had copies of insurance claims, medical billing records, and fraud investigation documents. While Meredith was busy harassing me, I'd been building a federal case against her. She moved to our neighborhood because her pharmaceutical company fired her after discovering she'd been embezzling medical research funds. The bee allergy was just her latest scam. She was planning to file a massive lawsuit against the HOA for failing to protect residents once she manufactured enough documentation. Dr. Chen stood up to explain the science. Dr. Vasquez's apiary operation is not only safe, it's been contributing to local ecosystem health. The pollinator research his daughter has been conducting with her mother's notes has potential applications for agricultural conservation across Tennessee. By the end of that meeting, our neighbors weren't just supporting my right to keep bees, they were demanding Meredith's resignation as HOA president. She tried one last desperate play, called a lawyer, threatened to sue me for defamation, claimed I was stalking her by investigating her background. But it was too late. The federal fraud investigation had already started. Insurance companies don't mess around when someone's been filing false claims for years. 3 months later, Meredith Hamilton White was indicted on 14 counts of federal insurance fraud, falsification of medical documents, and abuse of emergency services. The FBI had found evidence of a systematic scam involving fake allergies, fabricated medical emergencies, and fraudulent disability claims dating back 6 years. Her house went up for sale immediately. Apparently, federal fraud charges make it hard to keep up with luxury mortgage payments. The HOA voted to dissolve her emergency bee ordinance and issued a formal apology to my family. But the best part? The story went national. A local reporter had been following the case and pitched it to CNN as a human interest piece about veteran rights versus HOA overreach. But when the fraud charges came down, it became a much bigger story about how far some people will go to scam the system. Sophia got interviewed by 3 different news outlets about her pollinator research. Vanderbilt offered her early admission with a full scholarship to study entomology. The state agriculture department featured our family in their promotional materials for the pollinator conservation program. My honey sales tripled. Apparently, nothing sells local honey like a national news story about defending veteran rights against pharmaceutical fraud. But honestly, the real victory was simpler than all that. Every morning, I still go out to check on my 12 hives, listening to the steady hum of 600,000 bees doing their work. Sophia still sits in the garden with her mom's research notes, adding her own observations about bee behavior and flower preferences. The nightmares haven't come back. My therapy is intact, and my daughter's college fund is secure. So here's what I learned from this whole mess. Bullies rely on people not fighting back. They expect you to be intimidated by official-sounding paperwork, scared of bureaucratic harassment, willing to give up rather than deal with the hassle. But here's what bullies don't expect. Someone with the knowledge to fight back properly, the patience to build a real case, and nothing left to lose. Meredith thought she was dealing with just another suburban dad who'd fold under pressure. She didn't realize she was messing with someone who'd been trained to stay calm under fire, who understood regulatory systems from professional experience, and who'd spent years learning that sometimes the best defense is a very methodical offense. Next week, I'm starting on a new project, helping other veterans in our area start their own therapeutic beekeeping operations. Turns out, there are federal grants available for agricultural therapy programs that most people don't know about. But that's a story for another time. Right now, I've got to go check on my bees. Sophia's got a new theory about seasonal pollen preferences that we're testing, and there's honey to harvest for the farmer's market this weekend. Drop your state in the comments if you've got HOA horror stories of your own. I'm collecting them for a book I'm writing about fighting back against neighborhood dictators. And if anyone knows anything about water rights disputes, hit me up. I've got a neighbor 2 streets over who's dealing with some interesting problems with their HOA and a backyard creek. Apparently, some people never learn that veterans know how to research property law. Trust me, that's going to be an even better story than this one.